Thank you. So again, I promise not to be before you long. I want to thank you again, Adam, for inviting us to come out. This is really special to us because being given the opportunity to share what we see from our perspective being in Southeast Raleigh community as it relates to, your series on racism is really important to us. And we talk about it on a regular day-to-day basis. Reconciliation is our key effort, at Neighbor to Neighbor. So what I would like to start off by just sharing a story with you all that you probably are aware of, and that we had, Rev and I had talked about. And it's about one of a really, really close friends of mine who was shot and killed by the Raleigh police officer. His name was Akiel Dinkins. And so Akiel came into our GED program. And in addition to coming into the GED program, he also participated in the Jobs for Life program. But on the news, you may have heard a lot of information about him being a gang member and a drug dealer and so on. And those things were true. And he did, actually, participate in those activities. But the thing that a lot of people didn't know is what I had the opportunity and the blessing to get to see firsthand and experience for myself. So me and Akiel became really close, and Akiel actually stayed over my house quite a few nights. And my wife, dude, you got a room upstairs. If you feel like you need to just stay, whenever he's going through what he was going through, just go on upstairs, And so we had actually become that close. So this one particular day, Akiel came over, and he was going through a lot. So I said, well, you know what, let's just go for a ride. We went for a ride, and we went to McDonald's in Cameron Village. And we were sitting there, and he was telling me all about his life. And he was telling me so much about how he was tired of being on the streets, tired of doing what he was doing, tired of living the life that he was living. Now, mind you, Akiel will go to church with us. Akiel went to my home church with me a few times as well. So I already knew that the seed had been planted. Not sure by whom or how, when, but I knew the seed was there because he was going to church with us from time to time. So we get to McDonald's, and sometimes people just want you to listen. They don't need anything, just listen. And that's the spirit that I got from Akiel that evening. And so all I did was just listen. And the more Akiel spoke, the more he talked, the more emotional he got. And the more emotional he got. And then the more emotional he got. And next thing you know, Akiel had got so emotional, I actually had to take him outside of McDonald's. And I walked him outside, and there was this lady, and it was this white lady that actually came out. So she must have been overhearing the conversation, and she brought a whole bunch of napkins and stuff, and for him to, wipe his face and stuff. And I seen him when he looked up, and it was just like, I think at that moment, what I saw was a releasing, that Akiel just had to get all of this off his back. And that is what I saw. That's what I heard. That's what I seen. God blessed me to be able to see that, because we need to see and we need to know that even in the darkest of times, God is present. And we don't know when, we don't know where, we don't know how, but we know that he's present. And he was present in Akiel, irregardless of what was said by the media about him being a gang member, a drug dealer, this or that, or whatever. But what he was first was a child of God. And he spoke that. And it was just such an amazing experience for me. And to see someone that doesn't look like us come out and show that compassion for him meant just as much as what he was going through. So later, again, he's still living, he's out here in his life because he's struggling, like a lot of these guys are, with this side of life versus that side of life. He's, they say if you're a blood, you're always a blood. You got to stay in this or you got to get beaten out of it and so on. So he struggled with that. And as you probably have heard, there was a warrant out for his arrest, and the cops saw him, and one thing led to another, and there was a struggle. The cops shot him right there in Southeast Raleigh on Bragg, and he got killed. So I remember that day because I was at home with a few other guys when I got the phone call, and the young man who I call my son, who had introduced me to Akiel, he called me and he says, Kaz, they just shot Akiel, they just shot Akiel. And I said, what are you talking about? He's like, Akiel just got shot. And I said, where are you? He said, we're right here on Bragg. I said, I'm on my way. And I'm on my way up. By the time I get there, I get the phone call that he's dead. And it's just, I'm finding it hard to believe. So we get up there, and here's what happened from my perspective. By the time I talked to Reverend Royce and individuals at Neighbor to Neighbor, everybody from Neighbor to Neighbor was already on their way up to Bragg. I'm already on my way up. I look, I see Pastor Chris Jones from Ship of Zion already on his way up. And so many leaders are already on their way up to Bragg. There were so many police officers. And again, if you haven't seen it, you go on and pull it up on the news, you can see it was just so many people. And my focus was the young man that introduced me to Akiel. His name is Antoine, but I call him Navy. And my focus was I needed to get to Navy because I know how close they was. And Navy was the last person to actually see Akiel alive. And I needed to get to Navy. And out of all those people, he found me and I found him. And there was no words exchanged. It was just that embrace. I had to hold him, he held me. And he just kept saying, they shot him, they killed him, they killed Akiel, And so during that time, I'm looking around and I'm just seeing so many people. But here's the other thing. There was a lot of people that came out on that day that I had never seen before. There were different organizations, churches, and so on. And everybody didn't have the same interest. Some people came out to stir some things up. And I heard it. I heard some of the talk about, this ain't gonna happen, but the most important thing is that talk wasn't from the guys and the women in that community. It was from people that wasn't from that community. I don't want to stand before you and tell you that you did not see a Ferguson that day because of us. But I want to tell you that you didn't see a Ferguson that day because of the community. And the community recognized that Neighbor to Neighbor and everybody from Neighbor to Neighbor that love on them on a regular basis were there. They saw that Ship of Zion and Pastor Chris and his wife Jacqueline was there, and they love on everybody in that community. And so it became from where people was trying to instigate situations like what happened in Ferguson. It's not going to happen here. And I cannot stand before you and say we was a direct result, but I can tell you from conversations after Akiel's death, that when these guys would come down to Neighbor and say, yo, Kaz, man, this is how I'm feeling, or this is what I'm thinking, we can have those conversations. So again, I thank you for allowing us to be able to come in and share and talk, because racism is a very touchy situation. It is a very touchy conversation to have, but it's a necessary conversation, because the conversation after Akiel's death was the white cop killed Akiel. Well, now we need a healing. We need a healing because we don't want, nor do we need our guys who on that day found it to be enough that, we're not about to riot. So coming down and giving us the opportunity to share and to be able to overlook, okay, it was a cop, but we're not going to take that leap into a whole racism thing. So here's how we were able to do that. So like, I know you don't know any of the people, but it's like this guy named Arnold come down, Navy comes down, and a few of the guys came down. And we know there's some situations going on all around this country as it relates to cop shootings. And so now the conversation is these cop shootings, is this racism, is it a combination of the two? And the thing I have to tell you is, and I'm going to veer back a little bit and then you'll know where I'm going. So at Neighbor to Neighbor, we teach GED. And that movie 12 Years a Slave came out. So my GED instructor says, hey, Kaz, I'm going to go ahead and start talking about, this as part of our history, for the class. And so many of you may not agree with what I'm about to say, but I told her no. We can't go there. Not now. And the reason why isn't because I don't want people to know of the history, but we have to be careful about taking people so far into darkness and not know how to bring them back into the light. I know from these guys coming down and talking to us about their experience with Akiel's death that, oh, well, wait a minute. Is this racism? The weak mind, because they're seeing so much going on as it relates to cop killings, that if we go down this road, we better know how to come back and then know your audience. And sometimes your audience mind isn't strong enough to handle that. And I'm looking at my class and I don't want my class walking out just after talking about 12 years of slavery or roots and then get stuck in that darkness because nobody brought them back out to where we're at today. So then we look at Neighbor to Neighbor and we take a look at, I'm just going to give an example. If you haven't been, and I'll keep saying this, we just had our 5th year of what we call the Ivy League. And it's a basketball team that we have at Neighbor to Neighbor, and it's for adults that's 20 and older. The youngest, I think, is 20, and it goes up. I think we had someone in their 50s. And when I look at the Ivy League, this is one of the most amazing examples of true diversity and racial reconciliation, because you got 100 men from age 20 and older, and the diversity that's in there is amazing. And when you can take those guys that witnessed their brother getting shot by this white police officer, come down and put that off and to the side, however they handle that, and come into Neighbor to Neighbor and hug that brother that doesn't look like them. And because they have to do an hour of study, about men, so it's whatever the study is going to be on that Sunday. So it's an hour of study, and to be able to just embrace that and embrace one another when we all don't look like each other. That's huge. So I honor what we do at Neighbor to Neighbor for that reason alone, because Arnold and Navy could not leave Ivy League and go back with this darkness, if you will. But they know that every cop isn't bad. Every white person isn't a racist. Every black person isn't a racist. So it's bringing about that understanding, and that's how we begin to bridge the gap, as it relates to racial reconciliation. Adam talked a little bit about the Jobs for Life class. When we held our first Jobs for Life class, it was in 2010. And we had 20 African-American men. It was under a grant. 20 African-American men that were in gangs. And we was trying to help them to get on their feet, get jobs, go back to school, and so on. That was great. Of those 20, 17 of them graduated. But that wasn't just the blessing. The blessing in that class was all the mentors that came. And all those guys had the opportunity to see people sitting beside them that did not look like them, that had their best interests at heart, that wanted to help make sure that they were able to get a job or go back to school or whatever it was. We talked, every class we opened in prayer, we closed in prayer, and we had a biblical principle. This is what I see as when we talk about racism and reconciliation. My biggest concern is that we definitely must have these conversations. We definitely must let, in our culture, we must let our brothers and sisters know about their history. But we have to be careful about going so far deep in that darkness that we forget to bring them back out. Because I just do not feel like our brothers and sisters should be left there, number one. And then number two, know who you're speaking to and know that the mind is fragile. We talk a lot about white privilege, power, and prestige. And that's huge, right? Nothing to ignore. But when I share my thoughts about this, and I look at it on a much greater level as a need for systematic changes, you know, like mass incarceration. You know, there must be a change there, you know, and that's what I look at. But what I also look at is that I don't want my little brother to think that with power, prestige, and privilege, that he does not have that. I don't want him to think that he can't have that. I don't want him to think that he's not that, because he has every opportunity that everybody else has. And so the power, prestige, and privilege that we talk about as it relates to white America, we know what that is, and we know what that means, and we know what it stands for. But we have to be careful on not letting our young brothers, especially our young African-American brothers, believe that they are less than, held back, or can't move forward because they don't have power, prestige, and privilege. Because they do. Because you do. So I just wanted to share a little bit with you about that, and just share with you that I am so thankful for, again, this opportunity. I'm thankful for what God allowed me to see in IKL that day at McDonald's. I'm thankful for what God is doing in and through Neighbor to Neighbor as it relates to reconciliation and restoration and reconciliation overall. And I want to encourage us to continue to have these conversations. Continue to know our audience, continue to speak into that. And before I close, I want to share this one thing. I recently received a phone call from someone asking if I will allow my students to come to, I didn't even know they were still doing this, but the Scared Straight, I guess, you know, going into the prison and all. And I'm like, oh no, absolutely not. I absolutely cannot do that. How about if we take our brothers to the colleges? How about we take them to the universities? How about we take them to Kellogg's and let them see what it's like to work in a company? You know, we cannot keep putting all of this negativity in their minds. They have to see the hope. They have to know what their future is and that they have one, right? And so we have got to really start talking this